I think it is critical that at the MeidasTouch Network, we continue to tell the stories of these survivors of Epstein, of this horrible child sex trafficking ring that continues to be covered up by the Trump regime, especially after we saw Attorney General Pam Bondi testify yesterday before the House Judiciary Committee. And it was one of the most, if not the most, disgraceful types of testimony I've ever seen or frankly could fathom. She was asked a lot of very serious questions, not just on a partisan basis. We also saw Republican from Kentucky, Thomas Massey, ask Pam Bondi a number of very serious questions, and she would try to answer with, oh, well, you've got derangement syndrome and you're a failed politician. And those were real serious questions. Why were you outing the names of survivors when you had one job to protect the survivors? Why are you continuing to hide and shield and redact the name of co-conspirators and these powerful men who were involved in this sex trafficking ring? Why are you still withholding millions of documents? There were a group of survivors there. There were survivors watching across the country as well. And to see what Pam Bondi was doing, what I've just been hearing is it's just further re-traumatization. And what she did there just made things even worse. Now, one of the survivors who you probably have seen watching the MeidasTouch Network and clips that we've shown, because she's been very outspoken, front and center, a real leader in the survivor community, is somebody by the name of Haley Robson. Now, Haley Robson is someone who was sexually assaulted by Epstein from the years of 2002 to 2004 when she was in Epstein's orbit. We'll talk about what went down. She is somebody who has reclaimed her power from this horrific sex trafficking ring as a survivor to speak out. Somebody who is experiencing this re-traumatization by this DOJ over and over again. And we have her here today to share her story with her own words, not just the clips, but to go through this entire ordeal and to shed light on what took place and also why it's just so nefarious what's taking place right now. Let's bring in Haley Robson. Haley, it's great to see you. I wish under better circumstances, of course. But this is your life now. And when Trump and Pam Bondi and Caroline Leavitt say, we just want to move on from this, that's not a luxury that you have to just move on from this. And so this part, the sexual assault, we're going to talk about how you got into his orbit, what happened there. I want to start this interview, though, by just getting your reaction, obviously, to what you saw with Pam Bondi, what you witnessed as you observed that hearing. You weren't there. You watched it on TV. What was your observation?
I mean, I was appalled. I felt like it was definitely her antagonizing a situation. I mean, everybody knows that Trump's name is mentioned in those files alongside with plenty of other elites and politicians and government officials. It's not a secret anymore. And honestly, this is one of the reasons why I didn't want to partake in going to Washington for this specific event. Part of it was because I knew this was going to be what she does. Just like I knew Ghislaine was going to plead the fifth, I knew that this was just going to be a whole show of chaos and deflection. And the entire time, anything that was asked about Jeffrey, Trump, anything that was even related to the files, it was just her being combative and uncooperative. And it was really disrespectful and hard to watch.
And her behavior there compounded on as you mentioned, Ghislaine invoking her Fifth Amendment, even though she spoke with Todd Blanche, Trump's former criminal defense attorney.
Mm-hmm.
Now she claims, well, even though I've exhausted all of my appeals, which she pretends she didn't, I've got a habeas petition, as though people are stupid and don't realize that technically every prisoner has the right to file a habeas petition. But just because you're filing a frivolous habeas petition doesn't mean that that's an appeal. But you set that aside. You've experienced the DOJ leaking personal identifying information and concealing information about the perpetrators and the co-conspirators while harming the survivor community. Before we go back in time, right now, just what's going through your mind? What's your perspective of just where we are right now, mid-February, based on everything that's happened?
I'm not really surprised. I mean, I knew that we were going to be met with resistance and retribution. I did not expect for naked photos of some of the underage girls like myself to go and be public. And I certainly didn't expect social security numbers and addresses and phone numbers to go public. I mean, I've been very, very vocal on wanting transparency. And for me, I was never protected in this investigation from the day that I cooperated. So I wasn't expecting to be redacted at this point, which I was totally vocal and fine with. But I'm hurting for my colleagues and my other survivor friends because it's an act of war when you do this. This is what feels like retribution for going against the system and being vocal. And we're just being met with resistance and disrespect.
And I think people out there hear, oh, information about the survivors has been leaked. And that, I don't want to say it falls flat because that's obviously serious, but I like to use very concrete specifics so people know it's not just identifiers. As you say, they're naked photos of underage girls. These are personal identifying information that relates to sexual assault. So can you, before we go back in time a little bit, what are you aware of, whether it's your own information or those of other survivors that you're aware of, in the specifics of what's been out there that's really been causing a lot of trauma?
Well, I just said it. It's the naked photos or, abuse photos. Really, let's call it what it is. It's the child abuse photos that were released and leaked that was made public that really caused a lot of heartbreak, and just everyone was so scared because if you have no boundary to release a photo of a child naked, and you're the government, I mean, it's just, this is why we feel it's deliberate. So there were definitely photos that were leaked of underage children. Again, I know a couple of the survivor girls, they were saying how they found their address and phone numbers that were released of, I think, like several girls, a handful actually, and IDs, identification cards, like, those were released. And so when we talk about personal information, you got to think of safety here. Releasing, addresses and phone numbers and social security of victims and survivors of a heinous crime, these girls, their safety is now jeopardized.
So you were in Epstein's orbit from 2002 to 2004. We're going to get into some difficult topics to talk about, but first sexually assaulted at the age of 16. Do I have that correct? About the
I was raped at 15. He was 22. That's how I lost my virginity. And that was my first experience with a man in my entire life. So that set the tone, I think, for the future. And that following year at 16, I was recruited, and that's when I met Jeffrey.
And I think that aspect of it is important. I used to, when I was a litigator and I represented survivors in cases like this, often my clients had a background where they were sexually assaulted by an adult, and that was in their background, which is often used against them in the litigation to try to launch attacks on their claims and the veracity of it. And, oh, this happened here and it happened. You expect us to, that's what I'd get a lot from the defense when I would be representing survivors. But what is known is that these predators out there, they are looking for people who had a background, oftentimes where they were victimized before. And so, there are photos of you that we have, I think right around the age of when you met Epstein, and it's you playing football. It's you at high school in the West Palm Beach high school area, the Royal Palm Beach High. Talk to us about how, from the incident you talked about at the age of 15 with another person, you get into the orbit and you're dragged into this orbit of this monster, this predator who's out there specifically trying to target people with your background, high school, 15, 16, previously victimized by another, raped by another person. How did that happen?
Well, ironically, when I met Jeffrey, I was trying to escape the rape. When I met Jeffrey, I wanted to leave West Palm Beach. I wanted to get out. And so when I was recruited by Tony Figueroa and another classmate to go to Jeffrey Epstein's house, I thought I was walking into somebody that was going to be able to help me. And it's ironic looking back on it now in hindsight. When you're an adult, you find the little red flags that you just completely missed as a child. But I met Jeffrey, and Tony Figueroa and I went to his house, and him and the other young girl told me that Jeffrey could help me, and he was looking for a massage for $200. And when I entered the side, kitchen door and went upstairs, his assistant brought me upstairs. It was not a massage. It turned into an hour of me being sexually abused by Jeffrey. And it was just the most insane experience. Looking back on it, I am so thankful I got out of there. While I was in the room with him, he, did things to me. He made me watch him do things to himself. I remember grabbing me so hard at 16 on my backside that it like shoved me into the massage table, like as if he was trying to pull me closer. And then he brought out some inappropriate sex toys. And that's kind of when I was like, what is this? Like, I've never experienced that before. And it was terrifying. No, I'm not doing this. I'm sorry. I'm not comfortable with that. And I wanted to leave so bad. And I just remembering thinking to myself, if I run for the door, is it locked? And if I scream, is this room soundproof? Because all of the adults are downstairs right now, and I'm upstairs with him alone. And it was a shower and a steam room and a bathroom inside the master bedroom. And I was just terrified. And he made me watch him finish and was so disappointed. After he finished himself, he was so disappointed, and he just looked up at me and he said, listen, you're going to bring me a friend to come over and massage me, or I'm going to sexually assault you. And at that point, I had already been raped. I was terrified. I had no idea what was going on at that point. I just wanted to get out. So I made a decision based off survival mode and agreed to bring a friend. And that's how it started. And I was in his orbit for 2 years. His assistant would call me every day. She would call me asking, Jeffrey wants you to come over with a friend. And no matter how hard I tried to ignore the calls and the text messages, it was consistently every day. And it took me 2 years. And when I turned 18, I did not feel good. I didn't want to deal with him anymore. And I was scared to leave. I didn't know what to do. And I just kept thinking to myself, this might be my opportunity to move out of West Palm Beach and get away from not just my rapist, but now Jeffrey. And so I did. Shortly after I left Jeffrey, I moved to Orlando. And when I left Jeffrey, and this is something that I am, and one of the reasons why I have been vocal on the Transparency Act is when I left Jeffrey Epstein, he called my house and spoke to my dad. And unfortunately, my dad passed away from glioblastoma December. So I couldn't even have a conversation with him at that time about Jeffrey calling the house, because my dad at that point had already lost his memory and was struggling with his motor skills. When I left Jeffrey and moved to Orlando, I started stripping. I started dancing, and it was, a way for me to get control back over my life and for me to just be free. And I started dancing up in Orlando, and I met someone. And I ended up dating this person and falling in love with them. And he was murdered.
I'm so sorry. And around what time did that take place?
2006, June 22nd, 2006. It was a Thursday. And I never really thought that Jeffrey could do something like that, or that it would be retribution for me leaving. And I knew, I had a feeling that there was going to be some point in my life where I was going to have to, that something was going to come back. Either he was going to come back or somehow he was going to find me. But I never, ever in my entire life thought that that would be something I would make a connection with. But as I'm seeing all these files release and the malevolence and evil that's in it beyond just the sexual abuse, I can't help but to beg the question of, am I overthinking everything? Is that a crazy thought to have with everything that's in the files? And it kind of brings in that conspiracy theory that I've tried to not connect. And so simultaneously, the same week that my boyfriend was murdered is the same week that everything hit the media with Jeffrey. And so I lost my boyfriend. Everything hit the media, and then I was dragged through the mud. I was not protected by the police department, even though I was with Jeffrey at 16. All of my personal information was leaked to the police department and the press. I had to go through 17 years worth of a smear campaign, like a horrific smear campaign by Jeffrey's attorneys, by Jeffrey himself, and now come to find out TMZ in the files was paid $10,000 a month to run smear campaigns on survivors. And I had to go through all of this at one time in my life. It happened within days of each other. And I don't know how I survived. I don't know how I was able to keep a level head and keep a job and be a mom, but it's been horrific leading all the way up till today. And what the DOJ is dragging us through and what our government is re-traumatizing us for. It's literally being sexually assaulted all over again.
Did they ever find who was the murderer of your boyfriend at that time, or has that always remained a cold case, if you will?
It's a cold case.
And after that took place, you referenced the first time Epstein was arrested, and that was arising out of information that was obtained. I think it started off as a fight in a high school between girls who were talking to each other or fighting with each other and saying, you're a prostitute and you're a prostitute. And then the school overheard it, and they found that one of the girls had $300. And that started the beginning of looking into it, but then it was kind of covered up by local police. Then there was some, I think, important reporting that was taking place. And so that the first time around when you're being smeared, that's in 2006, 2007, or right around that period, because your name, talk to us about that period. And then let's fast forward to the more recent arrest before he died in August of 2019.
So one of the girls that went with me to Jeffrey's house, she allegedly got into a fight at in high school. She got into a fist fight, I suppose, and her mother was called down to the office, and there was a whole argument and there was a whole discrepancy about where the money came from. And I think she finally honestly told her mom that I had brought her to Jeffrey's. And so that was the starting. Her stepmother was allegedly the one that called the police. And so that's where the investigation started. And that's where I was brought in for questioning, which is wild because if you see the video of the police questioning me, and there's also videos of the police questioning the other girls, the other victims, you can clearly hear that we tell them, well, we were sexually abused, or this is what happened, or with Jeffrey. And all of us had very similar stories of abuse. It was very consistent. All of our stories were very consistent with each other. And for whatever reason, the department, I don't know if it was the Palm Beach Police Department or if it was when the FBI got involved, but there was a lack of information at some point in a disconnect that happened, because you had the Palm Beach Police Department that was trying to do an active investigation, which ended up becoming federal because in 2019 he got rearrested. But when this whole thing started in Palm Beach Police Department, they're the ones that started the smear campaign. So when I got called in for questioning, you can see on the video that all of us have a very consistent story, but the police officers aren't listening. The detectives aren't listening. The detectives aren't acknowledging that we were abused. They're only acknowledging that we brought other girls to his house, not realizing that we were children when we did this. I was 16 when I started with Jeffrey, and I left when I was 18. And so that kicked off the whole court case in Florida. And then I had Acosta was the one that gave Jeffrey, or somehow worked out a deal with Jeffrey for the 13-month sentence, which allowed him to go on work release, where he was still abusing other women, where there were police officers standing outside while he was abusing girls, while he was supposed to be locked up.
Do you remember the day when you learned about that deal? Because obviously the survivors weren't consulted. It was just, it was just announced. And now we see in the files a lot of the federal prosecutors who had to report to Acosta and the other people who led that criminal division were saying, you've really caused a lot of problems with these survivors and you should hear from them. But Acosta, did this deal with Epstein's lawyers. Do you remember when you learned about it and then how that made you feel? And this was after the horrific events of 2006, where there's this, horrible incident where your boyfriend is murdered. 2007, 2008-ish, you learn about this deal. you're trying to recover from all of this trauma. Then you hear about this. So what happens then?
It was so unbelievable. I remember my attorney calling me and telling me that he learned about this, and I did not understand. I was like, how are we not, like, why? First of all, 13 months? Really? Like, that's it? And it didn't make any sense to me. I immediately said that something's not right. I said, this doesn't sound right. I said, because the punishment doesn't fit the crime. And then that's when I learned the reason he got the 13 months is there was a lack of information that was being granted to the grand jury. So there were 40 victims that came forward with very consistent stories about being abused and bringing girls to Jeffrey's house. And those consistent stories never made it to the grand jury. Only 4 victims, I believe, were presented to the grand jury. And I feel like if all 40 victims were presented, we would have had a much different outcome.
So then I assume, and I never want to assume, but between when the deals finally inked with Epstein, like in 2008, really through Julie K. Brown and the Miami Herald starting to write about this again, 2018, 2017, you must be thinking, well, again, I don't want to infer, but he got away with this. You know, this is, he's free. Nothing's ever going to happen to this guy and this network of people. So talk to us about that as we then talk about the arrest of Epstein, his death, which now there's a lot more questions there too. If there were a ton before, but now it's like, come on, the Ghislaine trial, and then your attempt to recover from all the trauma that you've been through during those years. What's going on in that gap of time?
So when Jeffrey got arrested, everything kind of settled down, and I was like, thank God, I can breathe, I can get through this. It was a sigh of relief. But you know, the 13 months went by really fast. And I remember thinking to myself, like, he's just going to do it again. Like, I mean, you guys gave him a slap on the wrist. There was no real harsh punishment. The time didn't fit the crime. There's no way he's not going to do this again. And so through those years, I just drank a lot of alcohol. I tried to cope with it in different ways. And then eventually I cleaned up my act and I went back to school. I was focusing on myself. I had, moved into a beautiful place. I was seemingly things were getting better and I was being able to heal and there was room for me to grow. And
what years are those, Haley, when you went to school, just so we can situate it in time?
I would say between 2010 and like 2013, right around there. I didn't finish my degree, but it was a little bit of a break. It was nice. And then, between 2013 and 2014, I became a mom and I got married. And again, everything seemed very quiet and I was actually really surprised. Jeffrey Epstein wasn't coming up in the news. You weren't really hearing about Ghislaine. Stories weren't really being covered anymore. It kind of felt like it was fizzled out and it was done and over with. And so it kind of gave me a little bit of hope, like, okay, if this is it, like we're finally done with the situation. I can finally move on and build my life. And then, no. 2018, I met Lisa Bryant, who was the producer of Filthy Rich, and they were doing a documentary on Jeffrey Epstein because he had just been rearrested in New York for similar or the same crimes. And so I was asked to do the documentary Filthy Rich. So I met with Lisa Bryant. And she was, after 17 years of being in fear and being forced into silence from the smear campaigns, I figured, you know what? I have nothing to lose. I have nothing to lose and nothing to gain. So I met Lisa Bryant. We went over, we talked. I told her my story. She made, the documentary that was very successful. And then of course COVID hit. And, when COVID hit, everything got locked down. Nobody was able to get out of the house. For a while, restaurants were closed. So, what was everybody doing? They were all watching Netflix, and Jeffrey Epstein's documentary, Filthy Rich, had just been released.
And so
So
the
then,
documentary, though, was filmed. So Epstein dies August 10th of 2019, although we've now seen in the files that the prosecutors had prepared a press release the day before, which people can take whatever that is, but there's a press release written the day before. And there's also the timing of things in the files with an orange jumpsuit person, and even the person who was moved in to be his original bunkmate said that he thought he's been moved in there in order to kill Epstein because he's someone who's a quadruple murderer who kills, pedos. And so he's like, I assume they put me in there to kill the guy. But not that we can ever set that aside, but we'll save that for another show. But you've learned Epstein gets arrested. You are filming this documentary, and then you find out that Epstein dies. And that it's being called a purported suicide. And this is before he's able to be brought to justice in the New York case. He wasn't even, there was barely any court appearances at that point in time. I mean, the case had not gone to trial. Talk to us about when you learned that he died.
oh my gosh, I woke up that morning and I got a text at 9 in the morning. I think it was a Saturday. And it was my sister texted me and said, I hope you find closure knowing that, Jeffrey's dead. And I was like, what? Jeffrey's dead? I was like, no, he's in jail. And then Lisa Bryant called me and we had a conversation, and I just broke down. I just remember crying like hysterically. And then I just kind of started laughing, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me, right? Like, so he's never going to face justice because allegedly he took the easy way out, which I don't believe he killed himself. And it's very hard for me to believe that because Jeffrey is a megalomaniac. I mean, he thrived off control and power. He thought he was God, and he didn't think he was ever going to get caught. And so when somebody has that type of personality, it's hard for me to think that they would ever feel guilty or ashamed enough to want to kill themselves. I just don't believe it. I think he was murdered. But it was a very traumatic day that day because I felt every emotion. I felt sadness, happiness, joy. I felt emptiness, and then I just felt rage and anger for a while. And it was unbelievable to find out that there were guards that fell asleep. And then you're hearing about the cameras that allegedly didn't work. And not only that the cameras allegedly didn't work, but that allegedly there was an incident a week or two prior to that where, again, he was trying to commit suicide and the cameras weren't working. And I'm like, I mean, that just doesn't sound plausible to me. I don't believe it. And after he passed away and, everything was back in the media again. And I remember being in the media and they were talking about Jeffrey's death, and Mark Epstein had brought in his own person to do an autopsy, which I think was incredibly smart. And Ghislaine, they were like looking for Ghislaine for a whole year. And Ghislaine was like hiding out somewhere in the middle of nowhere, I think like up north. And they finally found her and brought her in. And that's when things really ramped up in the media because now they were getting ready for trial. There were victims that were coming forward against Ghislaine Maxwell that had proof they were going to put her away. And I'm watching this in real time and I'm like, I can't even believe the scope of the timing of everything. It like all was just happening in fast motion. And I just remember not being able to process everything. And I was at LA Fitness. I was at the gym and it was in the morning and they convicted her she was convicted and found guilty on her own charges of sexual abuse and trafficking. And I was so shocked. I was like, oh my God, like finally there's accountability. There's somebody that's, taking notice and what needs to be done and doing the right thing. Like, this is wonderful. Like, more people might start actually being held accountable. And it was all a lie though, because if you look at it now, in hindsight, what was the point? What was the point of making Anuska DeGeorgia and some of the other girls testify? Some of those girls aren't here anymore. Some of those girls, it cost them their life to testify against her. And to sit around and convict her and get 20 years, which is not even deserving. She deserves way more than 20 years. So to see her to get 20 years and then to have this administration and Todd Blanche, I cannot stand him. He is such a dishonest person. And see him get a 2-hour interview with her, and then she gets moved to a summer camp. I'm watching everything with the public in real time, and I'm like, I don't know if anybody else is believing or buying this BS, but I don't think he interviewed her. I legit think that he went there for 2 hours and said, what do you know? I want to know what you know, and let's work out a deal. She was a trafficker and a monster, and she sexually raped and abused children alongside with Jeffrey. And I don't understand how they could just move her.
Did you have any interactions with her, or did you see her? And by the way, when you were talking about the incidents earlier, sexual assault and rape, I shouldn't say incident. We should be very specific about what it was. That in the West Palm Beach home? Was that in that location? And then did you see Ghislaine, and what were those interactions, or did you know about her at the time?
So I had no idea who Ghislaine was. I never met Ghislaine. I think it was deliberate. But I never saw her at Jeffrey's house. I never spoke to her. I never was introduced to her. But I know that she was involved in some of this because I've heard the stories from the other survivors. And not only did I hear the other survivors' stories, she was convicted, which tells me that there was obviously an immense of foul play on her part. And there's no denying that she needs to go back to prison. So I was flabbergasted when I found out that Ghislaine was also too joining in on the rape and sexual abuse of young girls and women and children. I was surprised. I didn't find that information out till much later in the investigation. I was trafficked to Jeffrey and abused by him solely.
So then we fast forward to this current administration, which by now their behavior is such, I don't give them the benefit of the doubt and call it an administration anymore. I call it a regime because to me, that's just how they're behaving. But they start off and you have some hope that they're actually going to do what he said they were going to do. And, there are sometimes people who are single voter issues or one issue is paramount. Correct me if I'm wrong, but your issue when you thought about you were an independent. I've seen interviews before of you, but I'll let you say it in your own words. I'm picking the person who's running on exposing the pedos and specifically releasing the Epstein files. That's at this point that one of the main issues, especially given all you've shared with us, that was important. So you voted for this guy as an independent because of that. I'll let you say it in your own words, of course. And then you had hope. But then when did that hope that he was going to release this start turning into this is a cover up? Was it February when he had the influencers show up and hold up the binders? Was it before then? Walk us through that.
So in 2016, I voted for Trump. And I voted for Trump as an independent because the other option was Hillary, and I already knew Bill Clinton was implicated in these files. I've already saw the pictures that were released to the public. So I didn't want to go that route. So I voted for Trump in 2016. And then in 2020, I did not vote at all. And then in 2024, he campaigned, his entire administration campaigned on releasing the Epstein files and being transparent. And not just me, a lot of the survivors, a few of us actually voted for him based on him campaigning to release the files. I mean, at that point, he was the only administration that mentioned Epstein or the files or even offered to have any acknowledgement on it. So I voted for him again. And you know what really did it for me? I think what really pushed me over the edge to redact all my support. I know a lot of people think it had to do with Larry Nassar and that letter with Jeffrey Epstein. And that was a big part of it. But the way he treated Marjorie Taylor Greene and the way he treated Lauren Boebert and the way he treated Nancy Mace and the women that wanted to sign on to the Transparency Act, it was a clear indication that he bullied them and basically threatened Marjorie Taylor Greene to the point where she just resigned because she didn't feel safe anymore. And between that and the Larry Nassar letter, I was done at that point with the entire administration. I was so beyond disgusted. I couldn't even articulate what I was seeing in real time.
Right. And every time you hear him out there say it's a hoax, it's a Democratic thing, we need to move on. I'm fully, the more recent one is, I'm fully vindicated, and these files show that what goes through your mind when he says that, given all you've been through?
I think he's starting to get senile, is what I honestly feel, because I'm like, in what world does this absolve you of any wrongdoing? In what world does this absolve you of anything? Because I have more questions now that the files came out than I did before the files. Because this is the point that I, as a survivor, have been trying to make. It wouldn't matter if Trump was indirectly or directly active in abusing children. It wouldn't matter to me. What matters to me is the fact that you knew you had a friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. You clearly knew with everybody else what he was doing and what he liked to do. That was not a secret in the, elite or political world. People that knew him knew. And I know this because I saw a video of Cindy McCain in a panel where she says, we all knew what Jeffrey Epstein was doing, but nobody in the legal realm wanted to go against him. So at least the minimal, they could be opening investigations into anybody and everybody that's named in these files, so we can actually have a full-on investigation to get to the bottom of who was complicit, active, and who was abusing. We don't really have anywhere else to go. Like, there needs to be investigations. We're at that point right now. I mean, Thomas, Massey, and Ro Khanna named names.
The expression that I've heard used a lot lately is the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world that he didn't exist. And a lot of these rich and powerful people out there, gaslighting isn't the right word, they seem to have known what was going on, but they were the ones out there saying, we're the ones who are going to protect the victims and the survivors. We're the ones who are going to be going after the pedos. And so trust us because we've got your back. And now, again, also to your point, all you have to look at too is what they did with Ghislaine Maxwell. She gets promoted. She gets VIP treatment. And now the idea of her getting clemency is out there. I've said this on the show, and I said, what happens when the Department of Justice becomes a racketeering enterprise of covering up child sex trafficking? Because the DOJ, when they charge people in these RICO sex trafficking cases, everybody who's in the line, whether they are the person delivering the envelope, who maybe doesn't even know what's in the envelope of cash, to the leader, they get tried as a racketeering enterprise. And when you're out there covering up the sex trafficking ring, I don't know what else to describe it, and I'm not trying to be hyperbolic. So what do you make of that now? Is it betrayal? What goes through your mind when you say, wait a minute, you were the people out there saying this, and now you're the ones you've revealed yourself?
Well, and you're absolutely correct. I mean, this is supposed to be, the party of protecting the children, and I'm not sure what children you're protecting, because it's definitely not us. And what really bothers me is when Pam Bondi can be in an oversight committee hearing and sit there and say, there's no credible evidence, or yeah, if we feel there's wrongdoing, we'll investigate. I don't know what files you're reading, darling, but there are plenty of evidence of wrongdoing in those files to start the investigations. And it's tiresome. I'm so tired of hearing this administration just completely dismiss our trauma and disregard us. But they are supposed to be the party of, family values and protecting children. And, I just feel like if that's the party that you are, it seems like Thomas Massey's the only one showing up for it, and I have to be honest about that. And it's unique. Everybody should be on board with protecting women and children in society. I don't understand when it became acceptable to groom society to accept child abuse.
You've connected.
That's what it feels like they're doing.
You've connected with the community of survivors, and each bringing each other strength and leaning on each other during these very tough days. And talk to us about what that's been like, and as much as you can share about what that community of people who have all suffered through unimaginable PTSD and trauma kind of coming together and helping each other through all this stuff.
Well, it's been incredible. I have one of the best therapists I could ever hope for, and she's based out of Florida. Her office is right down the street from my house, and we have a whole support community for the victims of Florida, the survivors of Florida. We do like group counseling sessions for the girls in Florida, and it's wonderful being able to connect with other survivors locally, to be able to meet up and have those conversations and be able to support and check in on each other. During this whole diabolical situation, my father passed away December, and these women really rallied around me and were texting and calling and sending flowers and just making sure that like I was okay. And it's nice to have that support and to be able to connect with other people on such a deep level, and not having to have to express what you're feeling every minute when you're with them, but them to just be able to sit in silence with you and appreciate the silence because they understand where the silence comes from.
I could only imagine too, each of these moments, whether it's Bondi testifying, or I don't even know what you would even call that, or another Trump event where he disparages survivors, or just attacks the whole concept of transparency. Can you just talk through, I know people understand that it's re-traumatizing, but as someone who endured the unthinkable, and as you speak with other survivors, is there a way our audience even understands, what that actually means, on a day-to-day basis of you living with this?
It's a sad time in the world when the leader of the free world will not even acknowledge you or your presence or your trauma, and they're supposed to be working for the constituents to protect you, and they can't even show support. I mean, I would imagine if this happened in Denmark or a different, country that had stricter laws and actually respected those laws, I would hope that the leader of their country would stand in solidarity with them. And, obviously that's not what we're seeing and that's not what we're going through here. It's definitely disrespectful and very hurtful. And it is re-traumatizing when you're getting put through the ringer again and you're getting called a hoax or a liar. And now your followers actually think that this is a hoax when indeed it's not a hoax. I mean, there's court documents, there's grand jury documents, and it's discouraging when other survivors are looking in at this situation and feeling like, well, why would I want to come public, or why would I ever want to try to get justice for my own abuse, when look at these poor girls are children, were children at the time, and their country, the leader won't even acknowledge that they exist, or even acknowledge. I mean, we couldn't even get the Pam Bondi, who, in the hearing today, wouldn't even acknowledge or look at the survivors. And it's so disrespectful and beyond hurtful. And it makes you feel just alienated. It makes you feel rejected. And it's a hard burden to carry, but I know that everything in the dark comes to light no matter what or who you are. And so there's going to be a lot of things very soon that are going to be coming out in the light, I feel like. So I'm going to continue to be hopeful, and we'll see who gets the last laugh in the end, because this isn't a hoax and we're not going away.
Your fight continues, right? I mean, the survivors throughout the country and the world, I think, are this is, if the effort here was to stop you or to discourage you, I think it's had the opposite impact. And I think before we go, I'll let you put it in your own words, of course, of what's your message after seeing Bondi, Blanche, and Trump do what they did to try to intimidate and bully and demoralize and silence you and other survivors. What's your message today before we go?
You can't bully me. I'm not somebody you bully, and I've turned into the woman that I've always needed for my younger self, and I am very protective over her, and I am not going to cave, bend, or fall back just because it makes you uncomfortable. And I'm not going to be ran off with threats. I mean, I've already lived through the most horrific things that anybody can go through, and at such a young age, and I've already survived, and I'll survive this administration too. And best of luck.
Haley Robson, I know it's difficult to have to retell this story over and over and over again, and I appreciate you entrusting us with being able to share this story with the rest of the world. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you for having me.
Everybody, make sure you hit subscribe, and let's get to 6 million subscribers.
Want to stay plugged in? Become a subscriber to our Substack at MeidasPlus.com. You'll get daily recaps from Ron Filipkowski, ad-free episodes of our podcast, and more exclusive content only available at MeidasPlus.com.